You good to start?
All right, sir. I'd like to call to order this virtual meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission today, January 28th at 2 p.m. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Covington?
Here.
Commissioner Covington is participating by telephone. Commissioner Dewey?
Here.
Commissioner Ellison?
Here.
Commissioner Hutter? Commissioner Hunter?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaufman?
Here.
Commissioner Strange?
Mr. Strange is absent.
Okay. Commissioner Macha?
Here.
And Commissioner Davis is here. And Chair Brian?
Here, present. The meeting is now in order at 2:01 p.m. with a quorum of members present. Lauren Good, I believe you're on.
Mike, excuse me, can I interject here? This is Barry Covington. I do apologize for being on the phone, but I am in South Carolina doing a road trip down south, so it's the only way I could join the meeting, so my apologies.
I'm glad you said that, and no apologies needed. I'm impressed at your effort to join us because I knew you would be traveling. So thank you for doing this.
Yes.
Sure.
City Secretary, could you please give us the verification of the meeting notice?
The agenda for the Planning Commission special meeting was posted on January 14th at City Hall and on the city portal. It was amended on the 24th and reposted the same day, and then again amended on January 27th and reposted on the 27th. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. The purpose of today's meeting, of course, a special meeting, is continued discussion of the revised draft comprehensive development plan. Today's meeting is very important. Hopefully we can come to a consensus and have the CDP in form and content available for filing with the state on February 1st. So this is a critical time. And I know you've recently received the latest draft of the CDP. Lauren Good, are you with us from Wallace Montgomery?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. There will be no citizen comment today, given the timing and the lack of time really that we have. I would like to, just as a housekeeping matter, point out that we do have the next Planning Commission meeting, a special meeting on February 17th at 2 p.m. for the purpose of hearing to receive public comments on the CDP. And the public is certainly encouraged to participate in that event. That's February 17th at 2 p.m. Lauren Good, would you please pick up where we left off at the last meeting?
Sure. Everyone has received a copy of the updated draft, and I have received some written comments from several of you. So we'll be going through and addressing those for the plus version. Some of the comments are more just clarification or things that we can just address and aren't strictly substantive, so to speak. It's just making some modifications here and there. But there were some specific items that I know I would like to bring up, but then really I wanted to open this up to you all for your input on remaining items that need to be addressed. So if I may, if I could just highlight a few specific items and then open it up, if that sounds okay to you.
Yes. Now, in terms of procedure today, I think we're back to the old procedure, which was please raise your hand and I will look for you. I tried the raise your hand feature on the meeting last time and it worked intermittently. So rather than getting into that, for those who wish to speak today, please raise your hand and I'll do my best to call.
Great. The first item that I wanted to bring up stems from a comment or a question from Commissioner Gay during last month's meeting, right at the end of that call, and that was regarding the change from the 2022 to 2020. So I had received instructions to make those changes to 2020. So that is what the draft is called, the 2020 CDP, and other related dates have been updated in reference to the name of the document. One comment that did come in was in regard to a section in Chapter 8, the implementation chapter, that concerns the future review and update of the plan. So based on state requirements, a 5-year review will be needed 5 years after adoption, and then the full update would be required 10 years after the update, or after the adoption. So according to the state, those years would be 2027 and 2032. However, previous comments that we received indicated that the city would like to instead adhere to a 2025 and 2030 timeframe. So I wanted to just, I guess, make clear on that point what years we should be pinpointing in that implementation item to reflect that desire.
Okay. Good. Anyone have any questions about that issue? Very good. Oh, Jim Ellison.
Well, I raised this point because I think the language in Chapter 8 is a little ambiguous and confusing. And so I wrote here, is it correct to say that the 5-year update is to determine if the CDP, quote, is sufficient to guide Rehoboth Beach development decisions through the next full update? Now does that mean that as soon as the next full, let's say 2030 plan is adopted, that's as far as it goes? You could also read that sentence as saying that it's through the next full update, meaning that it would carry us through 2040. I just felt that that needed to be clarified for one thing. And then I think a few of us who have talked about this feel that it would be best if we could move more quickly on what we would view as a kind of continuation of working on a CDP. I don't think we're necessarily totally happy because of all the timing issues that with what we're going to submit, so that perhaps 2025 is the date we ought to strive for the interim review.
What I guess, sorry.
Yes, Rachel. Yes, ma'am.
What is the state requiring? I mean, realize we've had this delay with COVID. Are they shifting the dates, the 2 years? And we're suggesting we should stay within the same timing that has been in the past?
The city received multiple extensions to the deadline for certification. So the current deadline is the end of July 2022. And the deadlines get based off of that certification date. So the next full update won't be due, according to the state, until 2032. And then that interim 5-year period is a more in-depth annual report. There's more information that gets provided, but per the state, that wouldn't be needed until 2027. So that's really the question here. You can, of course, always do either of these things early. The state is not, if you wanted to completely redo everything next year, the state wouldn't tell you not to. So these are just the due dates as far as the state is concerned.
So realizing that, I mean, we obviously need some time to work on initiatives, right? Put those plans in place, have some initiatives and goals against them, and then obviously have some results. So am I
We can
missing-
hardly hear Rachel.
Yes, Rachel, could you please turn your volume up?
Sure. Is that any better?
It's getting there.
Getting there.
Better?
Better is better.
Okay, that's as high as I can go. So what I was saying was, it seems to me that we need that runway, right, till 2027 to give that update, because we're going to have initiatives and goals and plans to work through and have some results to report out against our progress. And if that is still the path, right, of where we want to be for that update before 2032. So I guess I'm not sure why we would want to do a 2025 update when the state's looking forward in 2027. Go ahead, Steve, sorry.
Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we can't stick with 2027. We certainly can take a look at it in 2025 if we want to, and we may want to. So, you know, we could bring it up anytime we want it, but it just seems to me that we should stay where the state has us, which is 27 and 32, with a note in there that says we may want to take a look at it in 25.
Well, Lauren, have you, the way you described it, really the Planning Commission could on its own elect to update. Is that correct? At most any time between now and 2027 or 2032. Is that correct?
That is correct. These again are 27 and 32 are the dates that the state requires that these be completed by. So it's basically the state due date. But yes, you can do them at any point between now and then.
Okay, well, it sounds like we have a consensus. Oh, Ms. Nan Hunter.
I was just going to suggest that we accept that as the consensus, but among ourselves, perhaps try and shoot for 2026 is just a compromise, and then try to get to 2030. I mean, there is something appealing to me about having it be a decennial basis and sort of on track with all the, what I presume are all the others. So that would be my preference, but I'm happy not to bind us to anything.
John Dewey.
Julie Davis has been waiting to speak.
I have been raising my hand for the whole discussion. And this is I think we've got two separate issues. The update is one set of issues, but the second issue is what we're calling this plan. And that's the issue that I think I was responding to initially. I agree with Nan. It just seems sort of easier and neater to stick with the decennial title. This was to be the 2020 plan. The information we're basing most of the text and tables and so forth are precede 2020, and we can still call it the 2020 plan, which I think makes it easier, and it's also in line with 2010, 2020, 2030, whatever, but then have the flexibility of deciding internally amongst ourselves about the update question as time passes and we decide we either have more to do or we'll just sort of wait for another year or so and see what happens and do an update instead of 2025, 2027, or 26.
Okay, Mr. Dewey.
I won't take everybody's time by repeating the same thoughts that Julie and Nan have both expressed. I find myself agreeing with both of their perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody object, or do we have a consensus on this point so we can at least put this issue to bed? All right, Lauren, I think you are good to go.
Thank you. One comment that was provided by Michael Strange was that there is a paragraph in the executive summary from the 2010 plan that has been, I guess, summarized in the current draft. And his preference would be to actually use what's in the 2010 plan verbatim. So that is the section, the 2010 plan language is that Rehoboth Beach is now and will remain a town within a town. It has 2 sets of active users. It has 2 physical identities. Maintaining balance among these various identities is a continuing challenge. The city will achieve this balance by using the CDP to give constant attention to long-term foundations of our community, the ocean, beach, and waterways, parks, residential and commercial neighborhoods, transportation network, and public and private services. I skipped over a few pieces there, but his preference would be to replace that in the current draft for what is currently the 3rd paragraph in the Chapter 1 executive summary, which is very similar in language, but he feels that the 2010 language was stronger. So before we made that change, we just wanted to confirm that no one would have objections to doing so.
So what he wants to do, what Mike wants to do, is to lift paragraph 4 from the executive summary of the 2010 CDP and put it into the 2020 CDP in approximately the same location. Is that correct?
Correct.
Anybody have any concerns about that? Seems like a.
Did we just hear what it is? Could you read it?
Just did.
The current language or the proposed or the older language that's being proposed?
The older language.
That was the one that I didn't read it word for word, but that was what I had just mentioned.
All right. Okay.
Anyone else?
What, if anything, is the substantive difference between these 2 formulations?
Right. Why did Mike want it changed?
His comments noted that the current draft was, it paraphrased some of that paragraph, but that in his opinion, the language from 2010 was stronger and more compelling. And those were the reasons that he had given. I have not done a word for word comparison between the 2 to really see where those differences might be.
Yeah, Mike Strange's comment has this sentence that says the original wording is far more compelling and direct, regardless of any individual's social leaning on where the future lies. It is still true, and that's his rationale for using that paragraph from the 2010 CDP and inserting it in the 2020.
So excuse me for not raising my hand because it's impossible for me to do so. But I remember Mike saying that, and I don't have the document in front of me, but wasn't the phrase "the city within the city" taken out of the 2020, and he liked it because it was in the 2010?
Could you tell me what? Just point of information, what page of the 2010 report are we looking at?
That would be Chapter 2, the executive summary, page 11. And it's the 4th paragraph.
So as I remember,
we had previously kept the language, the town within the town. I think at first we had changed it to city within a city because of the city of Rehoboth, the official name, but it was requested to go back to town within a town, so we made that change, but we never took out the phrase generally.
Mr. Covington.
That answered my question. I knew that Mike didn't like the change from a town within a town. I thought there was no mention of it. City within the city too, so I think that the new language is fine by me.
Okay. It's awfully quiet. Anyone else?
Well, I'm trying to
I
figure
recommend
out
we
really
make-
what the difference is. I
Yeah,
mean,
me too.
town within a town appears in both, that phrase appears in both.
That's why I asked the question before.
So
I've
anyway,
just
I recommend
copied and pasted that. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I just copied and pasted the language into a Word document, and I believe I have shared my screen to show that, if that is helpful.
I think the language is so similar to 2010 and 2020. Let's go ahead and accept Mike's recommendation and just change it. It doesn't change it substantively. It makes him feel better the way it's written. So I have no objection either way.
I agree.
Well, for what it's worth, in looking at the two formulations on the screen, I think the principal difference is that the 2020 draft language, which is in there now, expands upon the 2010 language. And to me, it expands on it in some very desirable, substantively positive ways. It's more detailed. And I think it says more about what I would like to say than the 2010.
Yeah.
I mean, for
I think I
example,
agree.
the last sentence in the 2020 version says maintaining this balance will require a commitment to future development and redevelopment, both residential, commercial, reflect and be compatible with the existing city neighborhoods and commercial districts and so forth. I mean, I think that's guidance for the future, which is, I thought, what we were trying to achieve with this document.
Okay, how would you like to proceed on this, members of the commission?
I'd raise my hand.
Okay, they took your screen away from me when we put this document up, Steve. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I think I agree with Julie on this, but here's a question. When we got our charter from the state, was it called a town or a city?
Well, I think it's a city, Steve. I mean,
I think under state law, it's a city.
it's the town of Dewey Beach, the city of Rehoboth. But that said, I don't think anybody really thinks that a little place that's one square mile qualifies as a city. Technically, it is a city and it's a municipality.
Right.
But I think town is more descriptive myself.
Our website,
Well, but
City of Rehoboth.
it said, the charter says city. And Julie, let me just remind you that when Friendship Heights came along, we did 42 acres, and that was considered significant enough to make it, a major development. So I don't think the size is the issue. The question is what legally is correct.
Well, the language now says, the 2020 language says that Rehoboth Beach is now and will remain a multi-function city or a town within a town, which is colloquial. So it makes it clear that it is a city.
Anyway, I do agree with, let me just finish. I do agree with Julie's statement about the more expansive description. But I mean, I think we're fighting over very little here.
I agree.
I was just gonna, I apologize, Steve, if I seem to interrupt you. I was just gonna move that we keep the 2020 language and then, decide this and move on. I don't think this is a big deal, but I do agree with Julie and Steve.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hands, please. And mind you, I can't see everybody.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And the chair votes for both. I'm just kidding. Okay, chair votes aye. Matter, we are keeping the 2020 draft language.
Good.
Thank you. Let's see. This one is a more minor question, but there is an action item A in the housing chapter on page 5-10 that currently is written, continue to enforce the city's vacation rental housing regulations, health and safety inspections, and licensure. We had received conflicting comments. I believe that at first the language had been strictly, and then it was requested to change it to eliminate strictly and just say continue to. And a comment that we just received wants it to read strictly enforce. So I just need, again, consensus on how to treat that particular item.
Where is that in chapter 5?
It is on page 5-10. It is action item A.
Okay. I'm working off of the red line, so I'll find it. Any thoughts about this, members of the commission?
I have shared my screen to show that language.
Are you on action item A?
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
The
All right,
suggested language is to change continue to and replace that with strictly.
to add the word strictly.
No,
To replace
substitute strictly.
continue to.
Okay.
What about adhere and enforce the city's vacation rental instead of continue to? Adhere and enforce.
Well, I think the concern, again, this is not a big point, but at least speaking for myself, I think I spoke to this at some meeting earlier. It's just that we've gotten some information or some suggestion that the regulations perhaps are not being enforced as strictly as they should, and that produces complaints with regard to those regulations. And in terms of licensure, I think the issue, frankly, is whether, my issue anyway, my concern is that the state is foregoing income, because some of us pay our taxes and fees and others of us apparently don't. So that was the basis from my perspective of using the word strictly.
Anyone else?
Well, I agree with Nan. I was one of the proponents for strictly. I can't think of any reason why the city wouldn't be strict in terms of its enforcement, other than perhaps they have a staffing issue, but I don't think that's something that it's up to us in this CDP to deal with. It just seemed that continue to enforce really doesn't say anything. It's not really an action item. It's just to state the obvious, a continuation of what they're already doing. And I think there are a number of people who think that the city should beef up its regulation and the attention it pays to the rental housing regulations. And I certainly agree with Nan, having been a landlord for some years for summer rentals when we had our house, and even for our condominium. I know to a certainty there are lots and lots of folks who rent their houses through VRBO or Airbnb, and they don't get the licenses. So the city doesn't get the share of the occupancy taxes. Since they're not doing it through one of the real estate companies like Lingo or whomever, the rents aren't being reported, the taxes aren't being paid, and there's a lot of money being left on the table. Plus, there are then some of these other issues that rental housing, particularly the seasonal rentals, raise. And so, I mean, I think it's meaningless if you just say continue to enforce. I mean, that's not really telling anybody to take any action in particular, other than what they're already doing.
Is that in the form of a motion, Julie?
I'll make a motion. I move that we replace continue to with the word strictly.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Ellison, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Raise your hands, please.
Aye.
All right, anyone opposed? All right, the motion carries. Lauren, is that what you?
Can I ask a question on this?
Sure.
Just a question. Even if you use Airbnb or one of these others, aren't you still required to get a license from the city?
You are
Yes.
required, Steve, but a lot of people don't. I mean, I always did. I always paid my occupancy tax separately. I had, some of it went through real estate, depending on who was the rental agent. But when I rented directly, I did pay the occupancy tax, and I did get a license, which I posted as you're supposed to post, you know, plain sight. But I know there are lots of folks who don't do that.
Julie, how do we know that? Is there data to show that? I mean, I
Well,
don't.
that's one of the things that we need to find out, because the city, if you go up and down the street, you know, you've got Airbnb rentals. I mean, I will get in naming names, but I can tell you, having lived in South Rehoboth for over 30 years, there were plenty of the units in South Rehoboth, which I'm most familiar with, where they didn't rent, they rented privately. And I would bet you any amount of money, if you checked, that there was never any license or occupancy fees paid. And maybe I'm wrong, but if the city made more of an effort to check its data and see, I mean, you can go online and find the VRBO and the Airbnb rentals. All the city has to do is then go look and see who's gotten a license for that particular property. So that's really what's behind this, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think we know how big the problem is. That's all.
Well, and that's part, and I think that's exactly the problem, Rachel. You're right. We just don't know.
And
Okay,
you can go online to the city and see a list of LLCs, but I don't think that captures all of the property owners that have a license to rent. So I just don't think we have the data, and I don't think we know how big the problem is. So.
Well, I think that might well be true, but I do think we need to find out how big the problem is, because potentially it could be big.
I don't disagree with you.
all right, Lauren, I think we've covered that one. What's next?
Okay. See here. Mr. Ellison requested a goal be added to Chapter 3 regarding the community profile. The suggested goal is to continue to support inclusivity with respect to city policies and its events and other activities.
And what chapter is that, please?
That would be within Chapter 3, noted it's page 3-26.
Okay.
Mike, I'll speak to that. The reason we used to not have any goals and action plans for the community profile portion of Chapter 3. And that really is where we should focus on this whole business of inclusivity. There are a couple of, I think, rather weak phrases about that subject in, I believe it's in the first section of Chapter 3, and they sort of sound a little hollow. In this section, where we talk about community profile, it's where we have all of the data on various ethnic groups and so forth. So it seems to me that's where, if we have anything that discusses this subject, that's where it belongs. And so I just prepared this draft, which I think is, at the very least, it's a stronger goal than the one that is proposed in that section.
Any comments?
Can you read the two goals? All I heard is Jim at the end of Jim's goal, which out of context, it didn't make any sense to me. But what's in there now, and how does Jim want to change it?
I believe he's just requesting addition of this goal, which would be continue to support inclusivity with respect to city policies and its events and other activities.
That's fine. Why
I
wouldn't you
don't
put
see how
that?
anybody
That's
could
fine.
object to that.
Yeah, I did.
Lauren, read the goal that was in, that you already had in there, because that's the one that I think doesn't really say much.
Currently, the only goal related to the community profile aspect, so that the demographics and whatnot, is utilize the best demographic data from government or other reliable sources that can assist the city in planning for the future.
Is there a
I
motion?
like Jim's language better.
Well, I think it's a different,
I was gonna say, it's an addition to.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is.
Jim, if you'll make a motion.
There is goal 9. All right.
What do you say, Luke? I'm sorry.
Chapter 3, goal 9 says continue to support the goal under chapter 3, continue to support and encourage inclusivity with respect to local community organizations. So at least that's in the summary, chapter 8, which is the implementation. I don't know whether that's in the chapter 3 itself, but it is in the implementation summary at the end. I don't know if Mr. Ellison's suggestion is to augment that, but there is at least something to that effect.
Does anyone
I'll
object?
make a motion.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to include Jim's language.
All right, Mr.
Second.
Covington. And who's the second, please? Julie Davis. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, very good. Lauren?
Mike?
Yes, sir.
On, there's another issue that's raised here, and that is in the initial chapter where all of the goals and city positions, everything's listed. The goals and action items are all lumped together, whereas, say, in chapter 3, we have 3 major sections of the chapter, and there is a separate section of goals and actions for each of those. And it seems to me that it's a little clearer if, when we try to, that we shouldn't really try to combine these, that it makes more sense to have the goals and actions associated with whatever those subjects are in 3. Keep them separated out, even though that means that you'll have 3 sets of goals and actions associated with chapter 3. It just seems to me that lumping them together kind of is like a little bit like mashed potatoes.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I have a question on this, because one of my comments, Nan's and my comments, were that we understood, or one of our goals was to have all the substance of this document, visions, key areas, goals, action items, visions, city positions in the first chapter executive summary. What I haven't had a time to look at and really check was that it seems that there's lists of stuff in the executive chapter, but there's no distinction made. It looks like it's all goals and no action items. For the action items that are in chapter 8 as action items for chapter 3, are those now merged into what is in chapter 1 as a goal rather than an action item? I mean, there are no action items per se in chapter 1. They're all presented as goals.
Lauren, what's your response to that?
You are correct. Chapter 1 does not currently contain any of the action items, but we can certainly add those in.
Well, I think, Lauren, that we decided at our joint meeting with the mayor and commissioners, I think there was a strong consensus to make chapter 1, the executive summary, as comprehensive as possible in terms of substantive matters. So I think that I had expected to see the action items in this draft, but that certainly should be added so that chapter 1 is sort of a standalone document, can be a standalone document that kind of, so to speak, says it all.
Okay, so we will we'll add those in and then split out. So for example, with chapter 3, there is there are 3 sets of goals and action items, as was just discussed, one related to community character, one related to the profile, and one related to the I believe it's organizations. So going back to the previous comment, we can split them or differentiate them as such in this area again.
Right, and put the action items after each one of the individual sets of goals.
Yes, yes, we will do that.
Thank you.
Well, I think that would certainly be helpful for someone who's reading this to at least get through chapter 1 and have some good idea of what's in the rest of the document. So I think that's a good idea. Any other discussion? Is there consensus? All right, Lauren. Oh, Lauren.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again here. Chapter 4, goal number 5, and chapter 5, goal number 1. The comment was that these 2 goals are similar, if not virtually identical, and whether we should have both of them. So goal number 5 in the land use chapter reads, consider adopting 1 or more mixed use zones, allowing a blend of appropriately located and designed residential and non-residential uses that would provide increased housing opportunities within the city's business area without adversely impacting nearby neighborhoods or violating the overall small town scale of the city. Goal number 1 in the housing chapter reads, consider establishing a mixed-use zone within existing commercial districts, allowing a blend of residential and non-residential uses as a means of providing additional housing opportunities that do not adversely affect the surrounding commercial and residential communities. So the question then on the table would be whether we keep these as 2 separate goals or eliminate one of them.
Any thoughts? Jim Ellison.
Mike, I am the one who raised this, and I think perhaps it's because in the current version, these 2 were, side by side. If you look at them in the individual chapters, of course, there's a whole chapter of substance between these 2 statements. And in fact, if we add back in the action items, these 2 won't be, side by side neighbors. So, certainly in my view, the statement belongs in chapter 4, and perhaps it also belongs in chapter 5. It just, I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about it.
Anyone else?
In my hand.
Julie?
I have, well, let's settle this first, but I have a related issue to these two paragraphs, but it's different than Jim's issue.
Okay, Steve Compton.
Well, I agree with Jim. I would keep them both in their respective places, especially the other one, the second one, where you want to make sure it's no adverse effect on the residential communities surrounding the commercial. So I agree with Jim.
Do we have a consensus to adopt Jim Ellison's proposal? Any objections? Thank you, Jim. All right, now, Julie, did you have something?
I have something different, but related. And this is a very good, if Lauren will leave her screen up. Mine is a terminology issue. Since this is going to be about zoning and where zoning goes and commercial versus residential, sometimes we say that the mixed use zones should be in the business area. Sometimes we say it should be in the business district. Sometimes we say it should be in the commercial areas. And then we say, as we did here, business area is referred to in 5, and existing commercial district is the terminology used in number 1. I'm simply suggesting that we standardize that reference, and I think the standardization ought to be commercial districts and not something as loose as business area, commercial area, that sort of thing, because this will have, I think, a technical meaning, and it should be, I think, technically correct. I'd be interested to hear what Steve thinks about that.
I actually agree totally with what you just said.
It's
All
a
right.
small point, but I think it's something that we should get right.
The commercial districts are the zone districts that are commercial, and it isn't just the business district. It could be somewhere else. I mean, whatever is commercial. So
Or
I agree with you.
Right.
All right.
So just to clarify, you want that all language throughout the plan that relates to that topic to now read commercial districts, correct?
Exactly. Not business area, commercial area, or business, whatever. Just standardize it.
All right. Hearing no objections, we'll move on.
John Dewey had his hand up.
Oh, John, I'm sorry.
I don't want to raise any objection. I support the conversation so far. What I would suggest is if we're going to have the same theme being addressed in 2 different places, that we consider using exactly the same terms or exactly the same words in both cases. I'm a little concerned that seemingly duplicate language that actually strays one from another could be used for different outcomes depending on one's purposes. So my suggestion would be to pick one or the other, combine them both together, but come up with one statement that could be in both places effectively.
Well, what I've heard was using the term commercial districts. Is that correct?
Yes.
John, does that?
If I may, are you asking that instead of having separate language for goal number 5 and goal number 1, that they be the same language in both places?
If I could say, I mean, we Julie and I did draft some language that I think captures everything and could be repeated. Lauren, I think you got that. I think that was sent to you. Maybe not. Maybe that's.
Yes, you had information on the mixed use terminology. Is that the comment? Yes. Okay.
Our concern was exactly what John Dewey just said, that you know, in addition to using what is the correct legal term, as we just decided, to just make it easier by incorporating, there are yet a couple of other places in the document that refer to mixed uses. And we all spent a lot of time, I think, talking about mixed uses. And I think we've reached agreement, consensus on what we wanted to say. And so Julie and I attempted at least to you know, reduce that consensus to specific language.
Nan, can you just say what that is again? Just.
I have it here, Nan, I believe. I
Yeah.
think what you added after the definition of commercial, after talking about commercial districts, you said, subject to specified development controls and requirements, RAE compatibility with surrounding residential and commercial properties. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
I don't, I mean, what?
It sounded pretty good.
I thought that was.
I believe I found that language. I can share it. If you give me one.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that I'm not working off a different copy from Julia. What I have is either the, yeah, that's the reference.
That's what we sent in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see that 2 paragraphs down from what I read. All right.
Let me just read it. That looked me.
Anyone else? Anyone have any objection to that paragraph, which is actually one sentence?
A long sentence, but it's good.
Yes. All right. Hearing no objections, it's adopted.
So then we will replace the existing land use goal number 5 and housing goal number 1 with this with the language that was provided that's on the screen currently.
I believe that's correct.
Yes, I would just point out that there's also an action item that refers to mixed use, and there's a portion of text. You know, I mean, it's, I mean, from the point of view of prose, it's probably not a good idea, but given how much we talked about this, you know, for example, taking into account community input and business stakeholder input, that appears in one of those places, but not in the other places. And we just thought it would be, you know, best to make sure that there's no question that what we intend is that, for example, that, you know, that kind of input be considered.
All right, no objections? Lauren, please proceed.
All right. Okay. Okay. One comment related to the chapter 6, which is the transportation and infrastructure chapter. And this relates to the descriptions of the city's water system, source water, stormwater, etc. Mr. Ellison noted that the descriptions of these various systems could be trimmed down or moved to the appendix. These I definitely will look for and defer to your feedback on this, but these water, drinking water, wastewater or sewer, stormwater, source water, those are all items that the state will be looking at the content. So just want to make sure that what is included is what you are looking for.
Well, what's there certainly is comprehensive. I mean, you can get lost in it, all the technical information. So is there a problem, Lauren, with what is there as you see it, or is it just, Jim, is it just that there's just too much of the same thing?
I just felt that there was way beyond a sufficient amount of detail in each one of these. But you know, if it's all about making the state happy, fine.
Okay. Does that work for everyone? All right, Lauren.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. And I do know that other comments have been submitted, and certainly if anyone wants to bring up any of those specifically, I'm more than welcome those. But we did offer a revised format for chapter 7 in this draft, and that we used as a representative chapter as an example of what the formatting could potentially look like. And we just wanted to have some kind of agreement on whether that was acceptable or if additional tweaks were desired, and then we can make the rest of the chapters look in the same look the same elsewhere for the plus draft. So I can again share that screen just so that I'm bringing up the look of those chapters, and then just if there are any additional comments, I did have some that were submitted So I don't know if that was from Jim, Nan, and Julie. So if you would like to bring up anything specifically, or if anyone in general has anything to bring up.
I thought it looked fresh and clean the way you had done it.
Well, just looking at it, I mean, I defer to anybody who's got more training in the visual arts than I do. But just as a suggestion, looking at the 2 pages that are on the screen, I would put the headings that are in initial caps, Beach Preservation Act and dunes and beach grasses. I would put them at least in bold, because you have come down to, you know, navy with white, then just navy, then you've got all caps for ocean and beach. And I think it would be, the headings would be more readable if they were at least bolded. Those 2, and generally speaking.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Ellison.
Yeah, I'm the one who stirred all this up, I think, about the format or layout. And I did make just a couple of suggestions. First of all, I think, you know, Lauren, you've gone to a 12 size text, and I think that there's nothing wrong with the 11 that you had before, which would make the headlines or the headings a little more prominent throughout, and it would save some pages in the total document. And the one other is that, you know, the thing that is always important to me is, you know, what is the order of the headings? You know, what is number 1, you know, and then number 2 and number 3. And what we have here is the number 1 is, of course, the water resources, which is the bold blue band. Number 2 is the water bodies, which is the blue, slightly smaller text with underlined. And then you have ocean and beach, which is solid caps, black, bolded. And that's very close, if not overweighing, the blue water bodies in my mind. So I'm simply saying, take the bolding out of that next order, the ocean and beach. And if you do that, that allows the water bodies, the higher order, to be more prominent visually. So there are just a couple of little minor suggestions I made, but I think this really does help the reader, and, you know, it overcomes my concerns about people taking a look at the density of what we had before and saying, hey, I'm not going to bother to read through this. So I think you've done a good job.
Jim, just a question. In that example you gave, should ocean and beach be the same font size and look as, for example, Beach Preservation Act, or is Beach Preservation Act a subcategory of ocean?
That's a subset. That's a subset. And that's part of what, you know, is confusing. You know, that was very difficult to read. And so that was mainly what I was trying to get at, is to make that ordering and subsetting more obvious. So yes, Beach Preservation Act is a subset of ocean and beach.
Okay, Lauren, do you see what Mr. Ellison's suggesting?
I do, but that in part contradicts Julie's, Ms. Davis's prior suggestion. So we can tweak it so that obviously the chapter 7, that header is what it is, and then for this layout in front of you, water resources, and that level header will have the main prominence, followed by the water bodies type header, followed by ocean and beach, followed by Beach Preservation Act. Make that hierarchy a little clearer.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? All right. Lauren.
One follow-up question that I did have, we had specifically received a request to increase the size from 11 point. So if there was I don't think I have a spread that has both on it, but if there's consensus one way or another, obviously 11-point font will reduce the number of pages, but it may also impact the amount of white space that's on a page. So just if there is any strong feelings about one or the other.
Dan Hunter?
Very quick suggestion. I'm not a visual person at all, but you might put the main body of the text, say in 12-point, but all of the appendices, and if anything, I'd like to see more stuff go to the appendices, that could be in 11. And I think maybe that's a way at least to think about addressing it.
So
I
the main
don't-
chapters is
All right.
12.
I don't have any strong views on the size of the font, but something else that would make it more readable would be to break up some of the long, long paragraphs in sections of the text. I mean, they are just so long and so dense that, at least in my case, I just sort of shied away from, oh, I can't possibly read all this. And I think it's exacerbated by the fact that the current text is 11 point. But regardless of what the font is, I would look as you go through it to break up some of those paragraphs into more readable bits.
Lauren, do you have someone in your firm that deals with design and this type of issue that could just might give us some quick input?
I don't know that they're available right now. They are not in my my Delaware office, but I can confer with them and.
Well, we need not. This doesn't sound like something that has to get resolved before you file with.
I absolutely agree.
So, just how about putting that on a to-do list and deal with it when the appropriate expertise shows up?
Okay, sounds good. And then I would like to just generally turn it over now to just for any comments or questions that that any of you may have. And that's not to say that we are not planning to address some of the other comments that we've received, but just these were some of the ones that we just wanted some further clarification on or consistency since we'd had perhaps some differing comments in the past.
Okay, Dan.
Well, I apologize. I had not brought this up before. It's not in my memo to Lauren. It just kind of keeps bothering me. And this is chapter 3, action item K. I'm not sure exactly which page it's on in the current draft, but it's chapter 3, action item K. It's at the very end of, oh no, that's wrong. Okay, it's action item K. I'm sorry, I don't know the page. But anyway, what it says is, in concert with all appropriate parties, review the structure of the city's government and consider whether it is appropriate for current and future needs. I just don't know sort of where that's from or what it means, or, I mean, maybe I've missed something, you know, maybe there's some history to that, but it strikes me as potentially really a huge ask to review the structure of the city's government, and so I just bring that up. I don't recall anything that would justify it or any discussion we had about it, and somebody could enlighten me. I'd be happy to hear it.
Seems to me it sounds like it may be beyond the scope of what a CDP should address. I mean, we're not here to reorganize government, I don't think. Mr. Mehta, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, as a general matter, I think that's true, although there are provisions of the CDP talking about the resources and the branches, the relevant branches of government. It's a fairly broadly stated action item, and the city could do with it what it wants to. I guess one question I would have is whether it is tied to a specific, whether that action item is tied to a specific goal, which actually is a general, and I'm just an advisor, I'm not a voting member of the commission, but it may be helpful, and this goes back to Mr. Ellison's point, I think, earlier, to make sure that the action items relate to specific goals. And so here, in this context, does action item K relate to a specific goal?
I think it does the one above, number 10, and that might help with the action item. I think goal 10 is talking about coordinate or communication and promoting awareness and transparency. So perhaps the action item is talking not specifically about overall government, but just ways to improve communication with the public and about the CDP, getting information out about it, which I think is a good goal to have in there, and maybe narrower than what Commissioner Hunter's talking about, is that it's really focusing on that goal then.
Well, should it reference that goal? The action item, should they be connected?
Well, I think it probably is meant to be, but maybe just elaborate with the action item and add in a phrase or afterwards about, linking it to communications in between the city and the public.
Okay, anyone else? Rachel.
Actually, that was my comment. So I'll just elaborate a little bit on it. I just think, we've had the government structure that's in place today for a long time. And as we evolve as a city, we have new needs, right? So communication clearly is one of them. We got feedback in the surveys that businesses want more and better communication. But there are other things in the government area that I think at times, as you grow and you become more of a year-round town versus just a summer season tourist town, that you just have to always be open to, what else should we be doing as a city to serve our businesses, our tourists, and our residences. So I put that in there. And I'm just trying to get people to think a little broader on, do we have the right structure and the right resources in place today to really take us forward for 10 years? In business today, you reevaluate that all the time, right? As you grow, change, potentially go through downturns. So it seems to me that we should think about, do we have the right structure and resources in place in Rehoboth?
Steve Kaufman.
A statement like this usually refers to a charter review commission. This action item would be something. So you might want to put a goal in there to consider commissioning a charter review commission to look at the makeup of the city's government. Otherwise it's not connected to anything really. When you see something like this, it's usually referring to a possible change in the charter of a community, of a city or a town, or So I'd either take it out, or I would put something in there as a goal that you might want to enact a charter review commission. Consider creating a charter review commission to look at the structure of the city, but otherwise it really is not connected to anything.
Dan Hunter.
Thank you, Rachel, for stating what was behind it. It seems to me that K, the action item, is the thing that really stopped me in my tracks. Was review the structure of the city government. That's a huge concept, I think. Whereas number 10 talks about coordination, communication, input. And I wonder if it could be phrased, review the structure, to me sounds like, I don't know how many people there should be on the city commission or whatever. That just sounds like a big thing to call for without any more discussion in the document. So I would be more comfortable if it said something like, review the community, structures for communication and coordination or something like that. And I think if it used at least a couple of the words from number 10, it would make that link more obvious.
But I wasn't narrowing it just to that, honestly, Nan. I just was trying to think about it more broadly. And we do have a charter, right, as it relates to what makes up the Board of Commission, what makes up the Planning Commission, et cetera. I'm not so much focused on that. Just, you know, within the city government over Hobith, I just wonder if we're really set up for success for the next 10 years. Is that something that we should just, you know, to Steve's point, maybe it is, you know, a charter of some sort that you get together with a group. I don't really know how you execute on that, but it is something that I just feel like we should address.
Hey, where do
I
we
just
go
feel
with
like it's
this?
a very big thing.
I'm sorry?
I just feel like it's a really big thing to call for, that we should.
Well, we
talk
don't
about
have a
more.
charter review commission or committee. Most jurisdictions do. And they can suggest change of charter. So either we think we might want to create something like that in the future, and an action item like this would apply to it, or we should just stay away from it for now. I think it's a really big issue, and maybe we ought to leave it for the next group to take a look at this rather than try to just put it in here at the last minute. But the city does not have anything now. Doesn't even have a committee that would look at the structure of the city. And I'm not sure how the mayor and the commissioners would think about this at the moment. I mean, we have so many other issues right now. So just my thoughts.
Anyone else? Jim Ellison.
Yeah, whether this is, you know, a good idea or not, there is no language whatsoever in any of the rest of the text that leads up to this as a conclusion. And so I'm not in favor of including it. I understand, Rachel, what your intent is, but I just think this goes too far. But the one suggestion I think that Tom made is perhaps appropriate, and that it's narrowed and tied to communication, which you know, is always an issue which can be addressed.
Okay, how would we like to proceed, having heard both sides of it? Mr. Kaufman, do you have a motion?
Well, I would take it out. I would move that you take it out because it's really dealing with a much bigger issue than communication. It's really dealing with the structure of a jurisdiction. And so I would move that we take it out. I don't know how others feel.
Okay, is there a second?
A second.
Second, Mr. Ellison. Any further discussion? Rachel, last chance.
No further discussion.
Okay. All in favor of Mr. Kaufman's motion, raise your hand, please. Say aye. Okay. Any opposed? All right. One opposition. The matter passes. Mr. Kaufman's motion is adopted. Lauren.
Nope, this is the part of where anyone else that wants to bring up any specifics, please.
One other thing.
Yes, sir.
First, I want to thank Lauren. I think that this revision that you did with all the changes was a Herculean effort, and I really think you did a great job. And I want to thank all of you who are into the specifics of the structure of things. That's never been my great strength. But I think especially Jim Ellison and some of the things you said, I really appreciate. I have just one issue, and it's still the issue. I think as to the future zoning map, there should be a note on there, as I've said before, that indicates that should the city adopt a future mixed-use zone, it could apply to the uses shown on the future land use map. Otherwise, there's really no direct connection, and I'm still concerned that should the commissioners or the future commissioners decide to adopt a new mixed-use zone along what we've been talking about, which I think is a very important part of this document, that they should not have to go back and ask for an amendment to the CDP to implement it. So if we just put a note on the future land use map, something to the effect, I wrote something down, in the event that a new commercial mixed use zone is adopted, it may be applied to the uses shown on this exhibit. That's all I would say.
Mr. West, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm trying to think of the language and what it would be on in the comprehensive plan map. Just
on the map, just the note on the map. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just expressing an intent or tying the two together for someone who's not as familiar with it. So on that map, I don't see a problem with saying that the maps to convey where the future land use policies are. In my mind, the mixed use zoning was a policy that was not graphically portrayed on the map, but it's still a land use policy that's addressed in 2 of the chapters that we talked about. So I think it helps clarify that, what its intent is.
Lauren, how difficult is it to update the land use map if you do have, for example, a change of zone that takes place or a new mixed use zone is created?
Mike, Julie is trying to talk.
Hey. Hey.
I seem to be invisible. I have a question, and it's a technical zoning question. And that is one of my goals, although I didn't say it a few minutes ago, of making sure that when we refer to mixed use zones, that we refer to locating them in commercial districts. Would it be something that required a change in the future land use map if you added residential uses above within one of the 3 commercial zones? I don't know, C1, C2, C3, but allowed residential use in as one of the uses that were permitted within that commercial zone. Would that be a change in use such as would require an amendment to the land use plan? Or if I'm right in the way I'm thinking about this, you've got the future land use map shows the current commercial areas, commercial zoned district. And this would just be an amendment, zoning text amendment to one of the 3 commercial zones.
Well,
this was an item that Glenn Mendalis had also weighed in on during our last call. The way that the language related to the proposed or potential mixed use zone is written, it's written as the mix of uses would occur within the commercial districts. It didn't specify C1, 2, or 3, but just that it would apply to the commercial districts in general. And from my standpoint, if that's already reflected and it would only be an amendment to the zoning code, so the allowable or permitted uses for those various, either those various districts or the creation of a new mixed use district related, but they would already have a future land use classification of commercial because of that. And from that discussion last time, I believe that Mr. Mendalis had also agreed with that statement. So that we had discussed this, and at that point, I think the discussion led to not needing to provide additional language on the map. We can add some additional clarifying language in the text, but any changes to zoning generally would have to comply with the future land use map. So I think that singling out something for mixed use it may be more detail than is needed.
John, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd like to preface this by saying that I support and I agree with both the intent to develop mixed use as well as the language changes that have been put in place to make this much more clear. My worry, and I'll allow attorneys or those with more experience than I in this matter to say if this worry is founded or not, is that if there is a statement or a descriptor added to a zoning map, it could be interpreted by some to say decisions have already been made about where in existing commercial zones 1, 2, or 3, it would be appropriate to place mixed use, when in fact the conversations required and outlined in the proposed CDP with mayor, commissioners, members of the residential community, members of the business and development communities, none of those conversations have even been organized yet. So that's my concern.
My question to you, Steve, is whether the text that talks about mixed use is sufficient to cover what you're talking about in adding to the land use map. In other words, is the text alone sufficient to let it be known that this has been looked at, this is a potential future rezoning type situation or a new zoning category situation? All I'm trying to do is see whether we're duplicating what we already have. That's all.
All right. So I understand exactly what you're asking, John, what you're saying. And I also understand that both Laura and Glenn have indicated that they think it's the language. Should there be a new commercial mixed-use zone adopted, it could be applied without going back and asking for a comprehensive development plan amendment. So I understand all of that. The reason I brought up my suggestion to put a note on this map is my experience as a land use lawyer 45 years tells me that the moment the city adopts such a zone, people who oppose it will immediately say, you can't do this without going back to the state and asking for a comprehensive development plan amendment. And without something further on it to clarify it, either in the language by adding that says, should it be adopted in the future, it could be applied to the, in accordance with the future land use exhibit map, unless there's that language in the body, or unless there's a note on the map itself. I know that people who will oppose this will immediately say you can't do it without a comprehensive development plan amendment, even though I agree with Julie. I mean, I agree with Lauren, and I agree with Glenn that the language should be sufficient. But, the devil's usually in the details. So that's why I brought it up. But I'll accept whatever anyone wants to do here. But I know that this kind of problem could happen in the future. So that's the reason I brought it up.
Any other thoughts? That really ties back to what I was going to ask Lauren. Lauren, what is it? Is just filing of paperwork to amend the future land use map? Is that, what happens? Let's say this mixed zone is created, it's adopted. What happens then? What is the process to get from here to there? It sounds like you may not have to do anything, according to Glenn. And if that's the case, if that's the answer, then fine, tell us.
From my perspective, if the city were to adopt that zone, then and it would be up to the city to determine whether it only would make, well, I guess you'd also need to make changes to the zoning map, but as long as that would take place within where the CDP future land use map has a commercial designation, that would meet the CDP as far as the future land use map and text. So that the map and text go hand in hand. You don't consider one without the other. If you're asking what if there's a change needed to the CDP, that would sort of require a whatever the amended language or maps would show for the CDP, that would need to be developed. It would have to go through the plus process. There would have to be a public hearing related to that. So it's a much more minor version of the process that we're undertaking now because it's just looking at that one issue, but it would still have to go through this similar process to make an amendment to the CDP in the future.
But if I'm an applicant and I'm seeking a mixed use zoning for a project that I want in the city, wouldn't I want the land use map to be formally approved and revised so that anybody that came into City Hall could see the zoning map and see that my property as a mixed use project was properly zoned? Wouldn't I want to rely on a revised land use map as opposed to just saying, oh, gee, the text says, I'm just saying, if I'm an applicant, don't I want belts and suspenders?
So the city's official zoning map would make that designation. And I think we've clearly stated that any mixed use zone that may be adopted is to fall within the commercial districts. I can add language in that any mixed use zone or zones that may be adopted in the future should fall under the commercial future land use classification, and just add that statement right into this language that will hopefully alleviate any concerns that there might be. But that really should be sufficient from my perspective for that to be accomplished.
Steve, that sounds like a good compromise. Do you
Yeah, I think that would work, actually.
Okay.
All I'm looking for is something that recognizes that could happen. So if Laura could add just that language she just said, Lauren, that would be great. That would be fine. It doesn't have to be on the map itself. It could be just in the language. That would be fine.
Yeah, the current zoning C1, C2, they allow residential right now in the current form. So you don't technically have to update the zoning map to allow residential mixed use. It's going to come down to how the city constructs a zone that does that. And it's a little bit too early to say, is it going to be a separate zone or is it going to be cited as parts of one of the existing zones? But
well, that's why the language would probably, that's why the language you just suggested would probably be appropriate.
Right.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for putting up with me on this.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it's Luke. May I just make a comment or two on this?
Sure.
So, I think in all these things, it's a balance, right? So the CDP is sort of like a constitution, a roadmap and for future zoning and land use issues. It's clear that the city council, the commissioners, they're the only ones who have the authority to enact zoning laws in Delaware and certainly in Rehoboth Beach. And so the key here is, on the one hand, the city can only enact zoning laws that are consistent or not inconsistent with the adopted CDP. So that's the one anchor. The other anchor is, and one of you has mentioned this, there is some case law in Delaware you need to be careful about. If the CDP is too specific, if it's too specific and then gets adopted, then you run into precisely that issue. There's some reliance on language in the CDP that property owners might take advantage of and create an issue for the government when they enact their zoning law. So I would encourage you to think of this CDP not as the authorizing language for the council to enact zoning laws, because they already have that authority to enact zoning laws, but rather think of the CDP as a broader sort of constitutional document within which the zoning laws that are subsequently adopted have to be consistent. So I think the types of, keeping the language broad to allow the city council to act within the broad parameters makes sense. And I would want to I think we all should take a look at the specific language that's being proposed. So you don't want to provide general strategic direction, but without being too specific. That's the only point.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Any other issues that we need to talk about? Julie Davis.
Thank you. Chair Brian. This is an issue that I have noted, I think in the past, but certainly the comments that Nan and I submitted yesterday. And it involves Chapter 7, Environmental Protection, where in two separate places, page 7.2 and 7.15, there is language emphasizing the importance of free, open access to our beaches and boardwalk, and describes it as a core value associated with Rehoboth beaches. This is a 10-year plan, and I'm concerned that there has been a lot of talk to date about overcrowding, concerns about whether you change parking fees and ocean blocks, lots of sort of strategies to deal with this. But I'm concerned that this plan should not say that it should not put down on paper for the next 10 years that we're going to have open and free access to the beach and boardwalk. And that's going to be a core value, high priority of the city. I just don't think we can make that statement or should make that statement. And I think that's the kind of thing where it gets too specific, and then the hands of the government, the commission to some extent are tied when in dealing with, I gather Chief Banks appeared at the last Beach and Boardwalk Committee meeting expressing concerns about all of the misbehavior and safety issues and so forth that we're now facing. And so I would take that sentence out as written and put in something to the effect that the city should continue to allow public access consistent with health and safety concerns.
All right. Anyone else? Mr. Ellison.
I have a couple of items. They should not be controversial, but I just wanted to make you aware of it.
Jim, will this help resolve Julie's concerns, or do we need to deal with Julie's concern first?
We should deal with Julie's concern first.
Okay.
And I support Julie. I'll say that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else in terms of what Julia said? Rachel Macho.
Sorry, I know we have two camps here on a lot of issues, but I feel strongly that should not come out of the CDP draft. We have data and surveys and history here. I totally understand that we have health and safety concerns. There are other ways to handle that, and I know Chief Banks has a lot of strategies and a lot of opportunities here to help us strengthen all of those areas, and he's very good at what he does. And I know he is trying to address some of these things, but we are not at a place as a town to put a lot of those restrictions in place. And it truly just rubs the grain of the history of this town. And honestly, Delaware beaches, and I'm a Delawarean, so I'm just gonna put that out there. We're not New Jersey. There are a lot of puts and takes around restrictions and beach tags and, you know, pay to be on the beach. But I don't think that's going to happen overnight. And I think we have a long way to go. I know this has been a topic over decades that has come up, but it has not really gone anywhere at all. And I don't think we're in a place here to make that change for this next CDP draft.
Kaufman. Steve, did you?
I didn't raise my hand, but I agree with Rachel.
Okay.
Well, I would not probably have thought to raise this, but I had occasion to go back through the surveys that were done in 2019. And interestingly enough, I would invite you to look at the responses from the business community to those surveys. This issue came up time after time after time. Concerns from the business community about crowding and safety and discouraging people from coming and for going to the shops and day trippers and all of that. And all I'm saying is that I'm not sure that we should be encouraging, have a categorical statement supporting free and open access as a core value and high priority for the next 10 years. I don't know that that's feasible. All I was suggesting was that we instead modify it by saying the city should continue to allow public access, but consistent with health and safety concerns.
Now, there has been some legislative activity by the Board of Commissioners. As I recollect, they banned tents on the beach itself, right?
Yes, they did that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and so could that, if this is left into the CDP, could that be construed as somehow should go by the wayside because that's not open and free access to the beach?
Well, I don't know, but I just, as I say, I wanted to just put it on the table. That's something that this 10-year plan should be careful about saying, because it is in very, very strong language in the current draft, and I would modify it to public access, consistent with safety and health concerns.
So excuse me, I can't raise my hand, so it's hard for me. I don't want to interrupt anybody, so excuse me if I did so. But I agree wholeheartedly with Rachel, and I read all the surveys too, and Julie may be right about the business community responding the way they did. I don't remember that reading the survey. The fact that the businesses think that there are too many people and they want to restrict access, to me seems counterintuitive. So I just would have to question that. And I don't want Rehoboth Beach or Delaware beaches to turn into New Jersey beaches. The idea that we're going to charge people for access just rubs me the wrong way. And so I would like to keep the language in.
Rachel Macho.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, I'd like you to point to that data. I have the surveys here too. I've poured through them over the last couple of years. I don't see that from a business perspective. There was a comment from the businesses around certainly how they can be treated by some folks visiting. And I know Chief Banks has certainly been all over that. But I would caution, again, just using the reference to New Jersey beaches, if we go down this path as a town, I don't think realize what that means for the property owners and our investments in Rehoboth. Go look at New Jersey taxes. You're going to see our taxes go somewhere probably between $25,000 and $30,000 to cover the deficit of income from having people come and visit our town, as number one. So I think that's something that you really have to look at. And then people aren't going to be able to afford their homes. We do have people on fixed incomes. I'm only a couple years away from that, but I couldn't afford those taxes in Rehoboth. I would have to sell my home, and I think the value of our homes will suffer.
Mr. Kaufman.
A couple of things. First, I understand what Julie is suggesting, but I do agree with Rachel. I would point out, as Luke Matta said, this is a general document. It's a framework. It's like he said, a constitution. The Board of Commissioners is free to impose any restrictions it wants in terms of legislation, in terms of safety and in health on the boardwalk, in terms of, for example, they're limiting how many times you can have bikes on the boardwalk or when, or dogs or other things. So they can address a lot of these issues that have been raised by the business community and others of unruliness on the boardwalk with legislation, with rules. I think the language that's in there right now is appropriate for us. Someday in the future, I guess we may have to limit access to the beach, but we're not anywhere near that now. And therefore, I think we should keep the language in. I certainly understand what Julie was suggesting, but I think that we're better off keeping this language in the way it is.
Mr. Ellison.
I don't understand how Julie's language restricts access to the beach. All it says is, that we need to deal with safety and other typical concerns. Beach stays open. I don't understand what the problem is.
We've already addressed that though, Jim. In the
problem,
we do need
the
to
problem
address.
is that you remove free, and that implies that we can charge for people to go on the beach.
I don't think free is being used in the sense of a monetary constraint. I think it's
Unrestrained.
Yeah, it's open.
Uncontrolled.
Yeah, it's open. I don't think.
That controls with the beach already. You know, we have rules. They're posted at every street. We revise those. We add to those. The tents is a new addition over the last couple of years. There are other restrictions that have been made along the way. So I don't understand why we would change the language. We already have restrictions in place for people to be safe and healthy.
Did this language appear in the 2010 CDP, Lauren?
I believe some version of it did, but if you'll bear with me for one moment, I can do a quick search and see if I can find anything.
Yes, Nan, while she's looking.
While she's looking, I'm suggesting, since there is, I understand there's conflict about the meaning of the word free. I wonder if we could simply add to Julie's language something like no fee, or something along those lines. Because I understand that this is a real drawing card for people to come to our beaches rather than New Jersey.
I don't even object to putting free back in. I just thought that the document shouldn't be quite so categorical in stating that free and open access uncontrolled is a core value, a matter of high importance, and that the city is not, and for the next 10 years, that's going to be the policy.
Well, then free public access consistent with health and safety concerns.
Yes, Mr. Kaufman.
So, Julie, how would you change it to add, the free aspect of it?
I didn't even think about your issue of free. I didn't think about it in the monetary sense. I thought of free was uncontrolled, which is why I suggested taking it out. But if you want to do free in that sense, fine. But the point is public access, free, whatever, should be consistent with health and safety concerns. That's all I'm saying. And that it should not state that for the next 10 years, free public access is going to be a core value with no controls whatsoever. And that's, that for property owners and visitors, whatever, the status quo will remain the same over the next 10-year period. I don't think that's practical. I don't think it's probably going to happen. But I think some qualifying language that whatever goes on, with the control of beach access and boardwalk ought to be subject to some concerns and considerations of health and safety.
But I didn't hear you. I didn't hear you add the aspect of no charge to what you're saying.
I never thought of it in those terms. I thought of free as uncontrolled.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, I think the point that Barry and Rachel are making is that we need to make sure that it's open and free access to the beach. The issue of the types of disturbances that you're referring to, that's regulated by statutes by the Board of Commissioners.
What if you say that there shall be public access? Get over the
It should say free public access is what it should say.
Not getting into money, just public. There shall be public access to the beach. That's all we're really talking about. The rest, and if that's consistent with health and safety, well then I don't see where that's objectionable.
Well, that was the language I was suggesting. The city should continue to allow public access consistent with health and safety concerns.
Why don't we just add without charge, or
yeah, I like that.
No fee or something, because obviously people are reading that word differently.
Say that again.
I just said that I put free back in. Free public access, but subject to safety and health.
Oh, okay. That'll work.
I think the term without charge, though, is a little more clear.
Okay,
Yeah, I agree with that too.
that's fine.
Are
I'm sorry,
we-
I did not expect that this was going to cause this level of controversy.
Well, we're saving the best for last.
Are we?
So do we have a consensus? Thank you. Good. Anything else? To Mr. Ellison.
Yeah, now I'm going to change the subject this time, but I also want to applaud Lauren. I think she got my comments 1 hour before this meeting, and somehow she got through them all and raised several of the issues. So I appreciate that very much. Just a couple, they're really not, this one shouldn't be controversial, but in the historic resources section of chapter 3, I'm suggesting that it be restructured to be just a little bit more, clear. We talk about the architectural survey, which showed numerous properties that back in 1990 that were eligible for National Register status. Then follow with the National Register section with its ending indicating that Rehoboth Beach only has 2 currently recognized sites. But then that's the end of the text. And I feel that even though we do have some goals and actions that follow along this, I think we need to add something in the text that says something like, it is recommended that the city take steps to increase public awareness of historic structures and consider other actions to preserve and protect these valuable resources. And that's basically the same language we use in the goals and actions, but the text itself felt incomplete without saying, so what do we do about it? So that's a recommendation.
Any thoughts on that, commissioners? Sounds good, Jim.
All right, another one in section on annexation in chapter 4. Even though once again in the goals and action plans, we state very clearly that the city has no intention to initiate annexation. It seems to me that the text should also include that statement.
I agree with that. I saw that.
All right.
Anyone else? Anyone else? All right.
Finally, under chapter 6, under pedestrian and bicycle initiatives, as a bike rider, there is no mention whatsoever of the Gordon's Pond Trail. Now, this has been completed for several years. The map doesn't show it, and there is no mention of that as an initiative. It's not a city initiative, but it is an initiative that somehow needs to be addressed. The Junction and Breakwater Trail is certainly mentioned, and I think we would be laughed out of our seats here from any bike rider seeing that there is no mention whatsoever of the Gordon's Pond Trail. I'll leave that up to Lauren in terms of how that gets resolved, but I think we must include references to that trail.
I agree.
I agree as well. Anyone else? All right, Lauren, if you will please. Oh, Tom?
Not about the trail. It was a different.
Okay. Yeah, Lauren, good. If you'll take care of that, please. Mr. West.
I just thought it's stepping back a little bit about the process. And this is, I think, helpful for people who might be listening in, is where we are in the process. That what the Planning Commission's considering doing is moving forward with sending this to the state for review. But just to clarify, this doesn't end the review. We still will be hearing back from municipalities in the state. There'll be, I think, at least more opportunity. There's more opportunities contemplated for the public to weigh in. But I just think it would be helpful for everybody to understand that what we're doing is taking a step towards moving the plan to completion, but the review process will continue. And I don't know if Lauren's got more on timing or whatever, but I think it's helpful for anybody listening in to understand that.
Tom, you actually got there before I did, and I was going to ask Lauren to outline the process. We have public comment on February 17th, and then Lauren, we had talked about how we may get an initial response from the state concerning the PLUS review the third week of February, somewhere around February 23rd, I believe. And then we hope to receive official written comments from PLUS the week of March 21st. Is that correct?
Yes. So on February 23rd, that will be the our meeting with the PLUS agencies. So they'll provide verbal comments of some of the any substantial comments that they may have, or anywhere that they're asking for some clarification. But we won't receive their official written comments until we're saying probably the week of March 21st. They have 20 working days after the meeting to provide those to us. So at some point between that meeting and that next to last week in March is when we would expect to have them. After that time, we'll need a little bit of time to review the comments and pull together some recommendations on how to address various comments. And then we would need, the Planning Commission will need to hold a public hearing where any additional comments by members of the public can be voiced. But then once that concludes, we will also have any comments that we've received to us through in writing. We'll provide those along with the comments from the state agencies, the county, and the surrounding municipalities. And then we need direction from you, similar to how we've done today, about how to address those various items. And then ultimately, we need the Planning Commission to vote to recommend adoption of the plan to the city commissioners and forward the draft to them. And at that point, the Planning Commission is basically saying, this is our recommended draft. We're now turning it over to you for adoption. And then the city commissioners would start, they would have their review, which since they have seen drafts leading up to that, hopefully it won't be a prolonged process, but then they ultimately would have their own public hearing because it needs to be adopted by ordinance, and then adoption would occur. So that's the basic gist of the remaining, specific steps in the process. We have not identified additional dates beyond those in February related to the comments or the PLUS meeting. So we still have to pin down a date for the public hearings, et cetera. But as an overview, those are the remaining steps.
And Lauren, as we had discussed, the reason we haven't pinned anything down is we're waiting to see what the extent and nature of the comments from PLUS are, in order then to schedule the necessary meeting dates for whatever action we need to do to address those comments. Hopefully it will be very minor, but that's why we've scheduled February 17th, and then we know what's happening in March. I'm sorry, February 17th for the public comment here. My apologies, my office is between two fire stations, and they periodically run both directions, as if one of them can't handle it. They both have to go to every single event. So I apologize for that. But in any event, we've scheduled February 17th for public comment. We expect an initial response to the PLUS meeting, the 23rd, and we hope to hear back officially from PLUS March 21st. And so at that point, we can assess and see just what we need to do to get over the goal line.
Correct. And just to clarify, we expect to hear to receive the official comment sometime the week of March 21st or thereabouts.
Right.
I think that we'll have a better understanding at the Plus meeting at the end of February about the extent or breadth of comments, I guess, or their, how much it would be needed. And I just want to make everyone aware, if you haven't been through this process before, they will provide comments that need to get addressed that are related to a certification issue. So those are ones that we have to address in order for the plan to be certified. The vast majority of comments that we receive will be suggestions or sources of additional information. So we typically get back these Plus responses that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 plus pages. That does not mean that the plan wasn't well written. It wasn't, it didn't do what the state is asking us to. They just had, that's their typical process that they use. So we will be getting back a longer document, but generally we would anticipate, only probably 2 or 3, if that, comments that would be related to certification.
Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, I had one request of Lauren. Following this, could you give us a complete document that shows the changes that were done in accordance with the discussion today in another color, in other words, blue or red, to the text? And I don't want to have to read this whole thing again. I would just like to read, looking at the changes that occurred as a result of today's meeting, just so we, all have something that's consistent. How to compare,
So
right? I don't know what other people call it.
If I provide a, for example, a PDF of the track changes documents that we use in Word to show the changes that we'll make. We won't have that on for any formatting items, but just when we're making changes to the text. Would that be what you're looking for? So any additions would likely be in red, underlined. Any deletions would have strike throughs, things of that nature.
I'm sorry, Lauren, would you say that again? The phone here rang.
Nope.
Any new language would be in red. Any deletions would, I'm sorry, any new language would be underlined in red, and any line stricken. How is that? How will you show it?
I believe that's typically how the track changes comes across. Commissioner Bryan had asked for a similar document, which I do have something in PDF. So again, if you'll bear with me for one moment, I can share my screen here. So this is the track changes version of the current draft that you all have just read. So this is sort of what that would look like. These chapters, instead of being individual chapters in Word, we combine them all in a PDF with the track changes shown. So here you can see any additions were red and underlined, and any deletions were struck through.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Now, Lauren, will you merge?
Based upon today's, I'm sorry, Brian, Mike, what were you saying?
I was just following up on your comment. Will you merge what this document says? You'll merge those changes and you'll start fresh, and the only red lines you will show are those that resulted from today's decisions, correct?
Correct. And I will not have this version show changes to formatting. Otherwise, there will be comments all over the place about
right,
changes to page numbers and whatnot. So just to get to the meat of it, I'll just focus on those revisions. We can definitely do that. That's very easy. One thing that I just want to point out is that since this is just to look at the text itself, It won't have some of the final formatting. So for example, in Word, we have these placeholder pages for where we insert covers and whatnot, and the ultimate page numbers won't match what's in the final document because of course the track changes language can throw off where something occurs on a page. So as far as that's concerned, you know, just don't be looking for page numbers or things like that to match up. But yes, we can certainly send that out along with the finalized or accepted changes in a clean version of the draft.
And show a fresh date on it, please, Lauren.
Yes, yes.
So,
We
so
will.
Lauren, I'm sorry. So I'm not looking for anything from Word, and I'm not looking for a whole bunch of different documents. I'm looking for one PDF that shows the track changes as you show it here. I've had so many different documents, it's been difficult for me. I'm using an iPad and not a computer, so this would be perfect. Thank you.
So we will provide at least two. One will be the PDF that shows these changes, but then one just to provide the document that shows the final version, which is what is being submitted to Plus.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we'll change the date to it to reference the February 1st date, which is when we are intending the Plus submission. So that gives us be snuggled up over the weekend, staying warm from the storm, making these edits, and then so over the weekend and Monday we'll be buttoning up these revisions so that we can submit everything Tuesday, which is February 1st to Plus to meet their deadline for getting on the February agenda.
Okay, well, I think that concludes what we had planned for today. I know the city staff would certainly appreciate a little bit early cancellation of our meeting so that they can get out of town and get home, at least from the storm that's coming. I want to thank everybody for your work. This has really been, it's been a good experience, and I think it's been good for us as a group to work together like this. Is there anything else that I need to address before we adjourn?
Actually, if I could bring up one more item, and I apologize, I had a note and I missed it. Commissioner Day reached out to me. She's been working on a tree ordinance and was going back and reviewing the section on trees in the draft that we sent out. And based on that, she also mentioned that there has been a change in the way the tree canopy is measured. So in the draft, there's a percentage goal for tree canopy of 40% or thereabouts. And then elsewhere, there's information that the city has a tree canopy coverage of 52% or something thereabouts as well. Those two percentages they're sort of apples and oranges because the methodologies back when the 40% was proposed doesn't match the methodologies that are being used now to calculate it. And the city arborist is also recommending not having an established goal such as 40% because they have not, there has not been a discussion particularly related to that. So they are suggesting that we've removed that specific reference to a canopy goal. So I did want to bring that up and make you aware that that was something that had been requested for this change.
All right, anyone have any concerns about that? I looked it over as well and I didn't see any particular issue about it. It's just a matter of how to characterize the canopy. Okay, well, thanks again. Everybody be careful with the bad weather and see you on the 17th. Now, I know you've gotten used to meeting every 10 days or so, and you're going to have to find something to do in your spare time. But thank you and take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.